Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this first series of our webinars that we are organizing with the Foundation for Strategic Research and the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. We are very pleased to launch this first series. The initiative for this series stems from the will to explore the region's shifting dynamics and to rethink African-European relations, especially in light of the shifting geopolitical landscape. Like many of you already know, as the Sahel faces increasing security challenges and local political reconfigurations, European actors are reassessing their strategies. Some, like France, continue to advocate for a firm stance against military juntas, and they are shifting focus towards Gulf of Guinea and Anglophone countries, while others, like Germany, have tried to maintain diplomatic engagement with the juntas and development aid. So this evolving context underscores the need for a fresh European engagement and more pragmatic approaches towards cooperation in the region. So just before diving into our discussion, I will give the floor to Anja Schimek, who is the head of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, France office, and not the whole foundation. And she will do a few opening remarks.
Thank you, Djenabou. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung France, I wish you all a warm welcome to this webinar series organized in cooperation with our distinguished partners, la Fondation pour la Recherche Stratégique. Developments in the Sahel region as a result of various coups and the withdrawal of France from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have led to the region increasingly becoming the focus of public interest. While France withdrew and the other European states also limited their aid because they relied mainly on France, the influence of Russia and China on the African continent is on the rise. The Konrad Adenauer Foundation and the FRS consider it therefore an important issue to discuss the future of the Sahel region and the necessity, as Djenabou has already mentioned it, of re-evaluating the relationship between Africa and Europe in the light of the current geopolitical changes. Today, we start the series of 3 webinars with the title Cross Perspectives from France, Germany and Europe, What Future for the Sahel? And the title already provides an idea of the subjects that we like to discuss today and during the subsequent 2 sessions that will follow in December and January. And today we will start with the topic, is the Franco-German strategy in the Sahel possible? It is evident that ensuring security in the Sahel is a complex and challenging endeavor, necessitating a significant contribution from Europe, particularly from France and Germany. As Konrad Adenauer Foundation, one of our key issues is the topic of security, and we recognize the vital importance of stability in the Sahel region and across the African continent. We, as Konrad Adenauer Foundation, we decided to be present in the region with a regional program, the Sahel program in Bamako and Mali. And my colleague Ulf Lessing, who is also, I'm not sure whether he's already present in this webinar, but who will be also a speaker in the upcoming events, is the head of this program and an expert for the region. Ulf actively helped us and FRS with both the conceptualization of the content and the selection of speakers for these webinar series. And I'm sure that Ulf will talk about his activities in the region in the course of the webinars. But just to give you an idea that what we are doing there, I would like to mention that Konrad Adenauer Foundation, with this regional program, organizes projects, operations in Burkina Faso, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, and Chad. And the program's primary objectives are to advance democratic principles, uphold the rule of law, foster political pluralism, and encourage civil society participation. In addition to fostering collaboration with the Sahel region, the office of this regional program places particular emphasis on advancing governance and security policy. Therefore, it is obvious that Konrad Adenauer Foundation was pleased to receive the proposal from the FRS to organize these webinars on Sahel together. It is crucial for Germany, France, and Europe to collaborate and prioritize their involvement in the region and contribute to the establishment of a sustainable security and stability framework. I would like to seize the opportunity to thank the Fondation pour la Recherche Stratégique for taking up this issue with us. And I also would like to thank my colleague Ulf Lessing. And I also welcome our esteemed experts, Denis Tull of the German Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik and Jonathan Guiffard of the Institut Montaigne. And of course, I would like to thank Djenabou, who organized this webinar together with us. And it was really, so far, it was a pleasure to cooperate with you. Thank you very much, Djenabou, and I wish you now a lively discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anya, for these opening remarks. So just a few more contextual points, even though a lot has already been said. So it appears that European countries have been at a crossroads regarding their strategies in the region, with growing anti-French discourse, and French scaling back its military presence in the region. Many have questioned France's long-term strategy in the region. And one question that has emerged is, how can France remain influential in a region where they still have interests, but where their positions are less and less audible? Meanwhile, Germany has been historically focused on development and diplomatic cooperation, and has been signaling a desire to maintain its engagement despite pulling its troops from Niger. In a similar manner, Germany is also at a crossroads, because with France stepping back, Germany can ask itself how they can deepen their engagement in a region where European engagement is less and less tolerated. Added to that, there's also the relationship between both powers that has to be taken into account, as they both have been pretty skeptical of each other's intentions in the region, which has contributed to misconceptions and miscommunication. So as both countries aim to protect their interests, the potential for competing strategies and priorities becomes pretty evident. The divergence in strategies raises critical questions. First, how can France and Germany, as key European powers, navigate their distinct priorities to foster complementary approaches in the Sahel? Could their differences lead to rivalry? Or is there room for coordinated Franco-German strategies that balances security, governance, and development? How can both countries find common ground to ensure a coordinated effort in the region? And finally, can a Franco-German strategy serve as a foundation for a broader EU policy in the Sahel? So we are very fortunate today to be joined by two experts who will help us explore these questions, Jonathan Guiffard and Denis Tull. So Denis Tull is a senior associate in the African Middle East division at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, and director of the Megatrends Africa project. This initiative explores the impact of significant global trends on African states and societies in order to develop strategic recommendations for German and European engagement with African partners to support fair and sustainable transformations. And with a focus on political and security dynamics in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly the Sahel, Tull brings extensive expertise in conflict resolution, governance, and the influence of international actors in the region. His research often delves into the intersection between political, social-political conditions and international interventions, providing critical insights into the evolving role of European powers and African states in regional security. As a recognized voice in discussions on European foreign policy toward Africa, Denis Tull's work frequently addresses the evolving strategies of European powers and the broader implications of global geopolitical shifts for regional stability. And Jonathan Guiffard is a senior fellow at the Institut Montaigne, specializing in defense and African strategic issues. He graduated from the Institut d'études politiques of Aix-en-Provence and is currently a research associate with the GEOD project, where he is completing a PhD on US defense, US cyber strategies. However, his expertise extends well beyond cyber topics, with a significant focus on the Sahel region and West Africa. From 2010 to 2022, Jonathan Guiffard served in various capacities for the French government, concentrating on strategic challenges in West Africa and the Middle East. His deep engagement in the Sahel has provided him with a nuanced understanding of the region's dynamics, particularly regarding diplomatic stakes and arming how these elements shape strategic competition in the region. And Jonathan Guiffard's work offers valuable insights into the evolving geopolitical landscape of the Sahel, bridging the fields of geopolitics, international security, and the impact of digital strategies, making him a key voice in discussions on European and African defense strategies. So as we engaged in this discussion, I encourage all of the participants to think about the broader implications for European foreign policy and international cooperation in a region facing a multitude of new transformations and challenges. So thank you very much again for joining us, and I look forward to the insights of our speakers today. I will first give the floor to Denis Tull for his presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me and for the generous introduction. Also, I should say I appreciate that this series is taking place because it has not escaped a lot of people that the Sahel has certainly moved down the radar of attention. For all the obvious reasons, and we all know the mechanisms of the attention industry, but I think it would be a mistake for Europeans and to just pretend that the Sahel and its challenges have somehow disappeared or can be ignored. One preliminary remark is simply, as we talk about French-German relations here, it's useful to remember that Germany's involvement in the Sahel between the last decade was first and foremost, although not exclusively, basically initiated through solidarity with France. And until 2013, Mali and the Sahel were rather strategic backwaters from a Berlin point of view. Certainly, there was a lot of development aid going on, but not much more. So this background to me explains why, for a long time, much of what the Germans did and also what many other European partners did was which were mobilized by the very able French diplomatic apparatus, were basically following the French lead and how it conceived the approach to the Sahel. Paris gave the direction of the strategy, and on account of its major interests in the region, but also on account of, let's say, its supposedly superior knowledge of the region. And for all of these reasons, Germany and others saw themselves rather as a junior partner as a supporting cast in the Sahel. This held, I would say, for a long time, perhaps, I don't know, 2018, 19, when most people started to realize that things were not going into the right direction. And secondly, that also France itself was in trouble to some extent in the region, increasingly. And you could also say France became, or to be a supporter of the French approach or to be aligned behind France became also somewhat of a liability, if I can put it that way. Before we talk about strategy, I think it's important to note where we are. And the point of departure for all of this is, of course, that after a decade of heavy involvement, France, Germany, and many others are standing here rather empty-handed in the Sahel. The political and security situation there has certainly rather expanded and deepened. And I think it's no longer controversial, really, to say that the different efforts of stabilization have been largely a failure. The second aspect of that is not so much the impact or the outcome, but what I would consider to be the political fallout between the governments in the Sahel and Germany, France, and all the rest of them. Which translated into acrimonious rifts on any number of issues, that the kind and type of support that Europeans were providing, the type of assistance, how it was assessed, the type of governance, or the possibility that the military might step in the Sahel to govern these countries, and all of that led to a rather dramatic political fallout, as all of you know. And I think that is really the second important aspect, which is a point of departure. The result has been that Europeans have largely withdrawn from the Sahel, not all of them, but most of them. And if they have not even been invited, as France, for example, or MINUSMA, to leave these countries. So that is basically the common background for Germany and France, although there is, of course, a nuance to be made. France has a long-standing history in the region, which is known. France has also been perceived as the leader of the pack, and so it has been blamed for much of everything that went wrong or not. And when the junta in Mali discovered that attacking France was really the best way to build political support domestically, this was copied by Burkina Faso and by Niger. And so France took the decision, to make a clear cut, basically to withdraw its troops, to withdraw much of its personnel, to stop aid programs, etc., etc. But it also, and here Germany comes into play, was seeking to convince its European partners to follow the same track, so to speak, in an effort to really isolate the regimes in the Sahel. Germany, I think it's fair to say, German officials were similarly frustrated as the French ones, but they pursued a more cautious approach. They were not convinced by this rupture, and here the buzzwords, I think, are staying engaged, being pragmatic, and all of these words that make the rounds in Berlin, rather than to emulate the French policy. In that sense, it mirrored also what the US tried to do in Niger. It's also fair to say that this German and American way of staying engaged was did not go down well with French officials. That is also certain. Who considered this unfortunate or betrayal or even a manifestation of competition among actual allies. But be that as it may, the problem with this German approach, I think, as far as I can see it, is twofold. In the German debate, there is a lot of, the case that has been made for engagement, I think, can be made and it is valid. But I think there were a lot of different motivations and interests thrown into this debate. Some look at it through the prism of geostrategic competition, namely Russia, and therefore you have to stay engaged if you do not want to leave basically the field to Russia. Others focus on the needs of the population, which should not be punished because of the political disruption with the governments. Some look at it as a problem of sunk costs. That is to say that Germany has invested billions of euros over the past decade, and it would be unreasonable to just basically pull out. And of course, others are also saying with a great degree of justification that the problems that used to serve as a justification for the involvement in the Sahel have not gone away, namely political instability, terrorism, illegal migration, etc. So I'm not saying that all of these motivations are not in some way compatible with each other, but I think there is a need to prioritize them and to from then on draw the right conclusions and strategic implications for engagement. I'm not really well positioned to say what these priorities should be. I think that's a very political decision to make, what was mattering for government. But I think that kind of decision reflection process has to be undertaken in order to make a convincing case and to draw the right conclusions when one is seeking to stay engaged in the Sahel. The second aspect is certainly that the second problem with the German approach is certainly that so far it has not led anywhere, especially I think the case which is most evident is Niger, where the Germans actively try to negotiate with the regime in Niamey to stay there, to maintain its so-called military base, etc., etc. They did the same thing as the US, as I said, and both of them were not particularly successful. Apparently, authorities in Niamey were not very interested in that kind of cooperation. And it's also probably can be presumed that French officials then felt a degree of satisfaction or malin plaisir. In German, we have that beautiful word Schadenfreude, because they were thinking, well, we told you so, you cannot work with these people. So I come to my last point, the way forward, and I regret to say I have no dramatically innovative ideas. I think on the French-German side, there is today less tension and a bit more common ground, because I think in Paris, there is the feeling that after all, it's perhaps not as bad if some partners try to keep a foot in the door, try to keep some channels open, and do not anymore categorically reject this notion of engagement. The Germans certainly have less illusions about what they can do and achieve in the Sahel. However, I'm not sure that you can really speak of a neat German ambition or position. I think for French observers, it should be taken into account that German ministries have a great deal of autonomy vis-a-vis each other. There is not one supreme president who gives the direction and everybody follows suit. So everything needs to be negotiated. On top of that, we have, as you all know, coalition governments, and also that comes into play when it comes to the question of what the German position on any matter, including Sahel, could be. And obviously, France and Germany are not alone in the European Union. There are certainly some countries which are even more pro-stay engaged, like Italy and Spain, whereas others are more closer to perhaps the French conception. Now, I think, as I said, the case for engagement can be made, but there is nothing, I think, that Europeans can do if there is no demand or willingness in the Sahel to cooperate in one form or the other. And I'm afraid that there is so far no evidence whatsoever that the juntas in the Sahel are interested in cooperation. And I think also that nothing that the Europeans can put on the table is really sufficient to reinitiate a cooperation, be it military or political or otherwise. I think it's, for example, totally inconceivable that Europeans would once more offer military assistance of some form or any kind, much less the kind of assistance that would be valued by the juntas. And if you look at it through the prism of geostrategic competition, I think there is absolutely no chance that Europeans would make an offer of military cooperation which would be assessed as being superior to the Russian offer, or if you are in that kind of thinking of competition. So I think, broadly speaking, there is certainly from the governments in the Sahel no sign of compromise, no sign of softening, neither with regard to the transitions or to tone down their rhetoric. And I'm afraid that these military regimes are today clearly in a logic of preservation of power, and that this logic may actually preclude any form of cooperation with either Europe or ECOWAS for that matter. By extension, I'm also convinced that there is absolutely no way back for them into ECOWAS. So in short, I do not see really a promising angle for a strategy in the absence of any sort of willingness on the part of the juntas to take a few steps in the direction that Germans or French or Europeans would probably like to see. And so I'm afraid to say that waiting for better weather conditions is right now the only option. I know it's I admit here perplexity, but I think that's right now where we stand if we are realistic. Yeah, and with that, I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very insightful presentation. So yeah, I will underline a few takeaways. First of all, the fact that you reminded that France was indeed the leader of the pack, as you said. What you said about prioritizing motivations, which also appears to be one regarding defining its interest and actually defining actual priorities and prioritizing them in an efficient manner. And finally, the importance of taking into account the local needs, because we as Europeans tend to focus on our strategies and forget that sometimes they are not wanted. The fact that yes, France and Germany might want to reassess their strategies, but it doesn't mean that the local governments will be as accepted of these strategies. Hence, for me, the importance of dialogue. And also what you said about waiting for better options, sometimes not doing anything is also necessary in certain contexts. But I will give the floor to Jonathan, and then we will dive into the debate.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to detail the French strategy, but I'll be happy to do that during the Q&A. And I'm happy and thank you, Denis, for your presentation. That way I can build on that, because I wanted to talk about what could be possible for Franco-German strategy, or at least what would be the foundation or ideas for that. But first, on the situation itself, as you said, Denis, the security situation is very, very bad. And now we also are facing strategic rivalries between countries in West Africa, but also more globally between France, Europe on one hand, Russia on the other hand, for instance. So for that, there is a need for France and for Germany and for the EU in general to remain focused on the situation on Sahel and West Africa in general, even though there is a fatigue on both in Paris, in Berlin, and in Brussels about that. I think there is also a need for anticipation and, more generally speaking, on strategic forecast. Currently, the situation is very hard to understand. We have a lot less information than we did before. The civil society, but also the situation on the ground, tend to have a shadow over it, and it's very hard to understand exactly what's happening. So there is a need to work on that on both sides. France and Germany need to understand that precisely. But in the end, I think that to build a Franco-German strategy, you have and you need to have a common analysis on what's happening, what are the threats, what are our joint interests, or what are the European interests in the region. So for that, I think if you want to build this common vision, you need to have a common vision on several key points. The first one being the Sahel is going to be fragmented and for a long time, probably for the decade or more. And at the same time, the jihadi forces remain the best on the ground in terms of like military capabilities. So how do you anticipate the rise of this threat, the jihadi ones, and more generally speaking, the fragmentation of Sahel? This is the first point. The second one would be that there is a need to deal with the political struggle of Malian, and not only Malian, but especially Malian, Arab, and Tuareg tribe of the north. This political struggle is at the start of the crisis, and if no one have an understanding that this is important to be dealt with, the crisis will go on and go on and go on. This is the same for the Fulani community. There is a huge problem now and a huge discrimination against the community, especially because of the jihadis, because the jihadis are recruiting people in the Fulani community. And so you have like an ethnicization of the conflict. And so the inclusion of Fulani people, the political inclusion, I mean, should be a priority. And priority for these local states, but a priority for a political strategy. And then the fourth point, I think, is the fact that this alliance of Sahel states, this alliance of the three states, is clearly providing support to Russian ambition. Of course, they are autonomous, and this is a key point also, because I think Denis talked about the difference of appreciation between France and Germany regarding these actors. But I think that the Malian authorities, the Burkinabe's authorities, and the Nigerian authorities made a choice, a political one. They have their own agencies and they have their own ideology, and they clearly align with Russian one. So there is a need for France and Germany to address this question and say, could they be potential partners, even though we do not share any we do not share the ideology or in general the strategic agenda of these juntas. If we manage to build, or when I say we, if France and Germany manage to build this common vision on these key points, I think that we can talk about ideas that could be interesting for these strategies. First one, Denis talked about that, but I totally agree that it needs to include other countries, especially in EU. It needs to include Spain, Italy, Poland, probably, because they have interests in the region and they are interested about protecting, of course, their interests, but creating partnerships, trying to understand what's happening. So I think that there is a need for a common vision between France and Germany, but also between France, Germany, Spain, Italy, and Poland, for instance, as a core group, because also you have like Baltic countries that are interested in what's happening because of the Russian presence. So you can imagine articulation between a core group of countries dealing and building a strategy towards Sahel, and then other countries that can connect to help them or to feed on their insight. But I think there is also a need of close cooperation with the US and the UK. They are both very interesting in the region because they know that there are a major security issue, and also, of course, because there are Russia, so there are the struggle with that country. But they, differently than Germany, but a little bit like Germany, they did not invest a lot in Sahel until recently. Even the US that just provided support for the French military operation, but in general did not invest a lot of political capital on this subject. So there is a need also to coordinate with them. And also because what we can see now is that every partner is rushing to local partners to deal with its own strategy, especially on security. And so you have, like, for instance, partners in the Gulf Coast, so Ivory Coast, Benin, Togo, Ghana, and all, that receive every different European or American or British partners without a common proposal and without a common strategy. I think there is a huge loss, even for the local partners, but a huge loss for this European community not to build this joint strategy. There is also actors like Japan. Japan is very interested about Sahel and West Africa in general because they have a lot of investment. And so they do not have a strong understanding of what's happening, especially on the long term in Sahel, but they have interest and they can be a very useful partner to discuss with these new strategies. The second point, the second strong idea, I think, for a joint strategy is the need for strategic clarity. I agree with Denis that France take a very hard stance at first against the juntas, and Germany and other countries try to be more pragmatic. But because this junta made a political choice and not because they were forced to work with the Russian, because they align with the values and they align with the political system, we are going to lose every time we think that this is only a pragmatic approach we need to have. This is also a political approach. And I think that this strategic clarity can help reduce uncertainty, but also can help the European to be more proactive and to be at the initiative and not to react to everything that's going to happen in Sahel, like they are currently doing. So, of course, we can deal with autocrats, but this is very different than dealing with former partners. Even though they were not very perfect democracies, the system was clearly different. And you can see that, for instance, for the civil societies, because now civil societies in Sahel are completely shut down. They are reduced and people have been put under pressure, which has not been the same and on the same scale before. So clearly you need to have strategic clarity. It's not the same working with juntas, aligned with Russia, and working with former partners in Sahel. You also have a need, the third strong idea is a need for strategic patience. So it's exactly what Denis said at the end. Maybe you need to wait for better options. I tend to agree to that. But strategic patience is not doing nothing. It's just like waiting for the good conditions, but by preparing, anticipating, and building other coalition, other networks, other ideas. Because in the end, if we are doing nothing and just waiting, we are going to react to the future again and again. So there is a need for strategic patience and preparation. So on the two main issues that are the security situation on one hand and the strategic rivalries on the other hand. On the security situation, I think that there is a window for France and Germany to engage with regional partners and with big regional partners that tend not to be engaged enough in the crisis. I mean by that Algeria, Mauritania, Togo, Ivory Coast, and Ghana, for instance. Even Nigeria also. They are dealing with their own issue, of course, and they are looking at the Sahel crisis from that perspective. But clearly, even though they were not super happy all the time with France being in the region or in Westerners or European being in the region, in the end, they do not act and they do not engage that much on the crisis. This needs to change. To build consensus, this needs to be changed, and a European strategy could be like trying to engage them to build a common vision on what's happening currently in Sahel. This is the first idea. Another one is like to anticipate the fact that we are going to have in the near future new jihadi emirates that are going to pop up. Clearly, half of Mali and almost the entire territory of Burkina Faso is under jihadi loose control, but they have a political project. They have this project from the start. And so at some point, they're going to take back more control, for instance, of the cities or of several key regions, and they're going to declare and announce a new emirate. And at that moment, we need to be prepared for that moment. For instance, in building the common understanding of what could happen with different partners, but between France and Germany, but also to prepare other partners in Europe or locally to this scenario, the fact that the jihadists will have a new emirate at some point, and also maybe to build a coalition, not a military coalition per se, but at least a diplomatic one, to build a coalition with different countries to say, okay, this situation is going to be worse, and what should we do to anticipate that, and what should we do then when it happens? How can we deal with that situation? Should we do something or not? Should we do something military speaking or not? But at least let's have this discussion open already. There is also a need to enhance local partners, especially countries around Sahel. And so, as I said earlier, I think that if France do something on one hand, Germany on the other hand, the UK on the third part, this does not make sense. And clearly a Franco-German strategy could be to engage jointly these partners. They need equipment, they need advice, and they need training, and they need lesson learned. And lesson learned is very important because they are facing a new threat, which is a new threat for them, which is not a new threat for France and Germany. And also on the security situation. And so an idea that is, I think, very central is to invest massively in agriculture. I published a report last year on that, and we discussed that with Denis before. There is a need not to disperse the money on every sector, every project, every issue. The main and the major problem for the economy currently in Sahel and around is the agriculture. It needs to be massively supported, and there is a need for modernization. There is a need to help them develop these sectors. And I think that targeted support will work way better than the different sector approach, where Germany, France, and other European countries are supporting different small projects of development. In the end, we don't have the macro effect that we are expecting. And now that there are like maybe 40 years of like ODA, we clearly see that it is not working as much as we want. And then several ideas on this to tackle the strategic rivalries with Russia, but also with the juntas, or I mean in general with like autocratic in the region. First, I think there is a need for France and Germany to document and characterize the crimes that are currently happening in Sahel. We are facing mass execution of civilians. There are huge problems on human rights. Civil societies are getting shut down, and also France and Germany can document these crimes, and they can support the work from NGOs, for instance, that are doing so. There is a need for future accountability. It will be key in the future. It will be key clearly, in the future. But there is also the idea of supporting democratic forces. What I mean by that is just by opening Europe, opening Paris, Berlin for conferences, for coordination, not dealing and not meddling with local politics, but just giving a floor, giving space to African democratic forces and Sahelian democratic forces that wants to coordinate, organize, and because they are currently very fragile, they are currently targeted in their own country. And if in the long run, if you want to have like forces that build norms, that build democratic norms in the future, there is, I think, there is a need for France and Germany to invest and to support these forces. But there is also the subject of colonial legacy. France, Germany, France more than Germany, but still Germany and also other European countries need to address this issue because this is currently used against them. And there is projects to do. There is topics like arts, history, science. There is many different issues that can be dealt with. And finally, I think that France and Germany need to expect a push, an aggressive push against Ivory Coast, Benin and Chad. They are currently targeted by Sahelian states and they are targeted by Russia. And I think there is a need for a political strategy to support this country and anticipate this current struggle. This was like different general ideas, and I'll be happy to talk about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for this very interesting presentation. I particularly appreciated some of your takeaways, for example, the need for anticipation and strategic forecast, which is fundamental not to repeat the same mistakes. Also, the need for a pragmatic but also political approach. Like you said, the junta has made a political choice, and European actors should review their priorities and interests and choices in light of that. Also, the need to involve other actors like Denis also talked about, and you mentioned Algeria, of course, Nigeria, and I would be curious in the discussion to talk about the potential role of ECOWAS and the African Union. Is there a possibility to better integrate European strategies with these regional organizations? And finally, the investment in agriculture that you very interestingly depict in your paper, which for me underlines the need for actors to identify specific tools and to identify how they can leverage these tools and how they can use in the most efficient way their comparative advantages. So I just before giving the floor to the audience, I've already seen a few interesting questions. I will just give you a few questions. Well, you of interest, but how aligned are French and German interests in the Sahel? And what are the main points of divergence and obstacles to developing such a Franco-German strategy? That would be my first question. My second one would be, what steps can France and Germany would be able to take to rebuild trust and credibility in the region? And finally, like both of you actually mentioned, to what extent can a Franco-German strategy serve as a basis of the region?
I'm sorry, I could not understand the last question because there was a disruption. Could you?
Yeah, sorry. It was to what extent German strategy could serve as a foundation for a broader European policy strategy in the region. So, any other view of the floor?
Okay. Well, then I can start. Well, I think that ultimately I have trouble to think that when French and German policymakers now look at the Sahel, that they are fundamentally diverged in their views on what's going on there and what are European concerns. I think, of course, France has also a much broader interest in the entire West African region, but I think, as I said before, the main issues, jihadism, migration, political instability, are still there. Plus, of course, and the concern about Russia, which is then by extension also amplified through the crisis and the war and invasion of Ukraine, which is of course then bringing, as Jonathan said, other European partners into the conversation, as we have already seen before with the task force Takuba, Barkhane, where Estonia, etc., and all the likes participated for that very reason. So I'm actually not that. So I think there is not a fundamental diverging view on the Sahel. It's rather on what you can do. But I should also mention that in Germany there is a deeply ingrained kind of somewhat let me rephrase it. The French Africa policy has not the best press in Germany. So there are a lot of question marks about its interests, shadowy interests. There's a lot of mythology about that, but there are also some valid questions. I think on the working level between different departments, there is a more straightforward conversation right now, but in public, in the press, but also in parliament, there are certainly concerns, and they are oftentimes also, sometimes at least valid, because the one problem that Europe had in the past decade or so is really that, on the one hand, France wants to be the leader, has that ambition to be the leader, and others were not necessarily able to influence sufficiently the debate. Of course, that is also because they were sometimes reluctant to influence that debate, precisely because they thought, okay, I mean, after all, this is France, this is the Sahel, and we are just a supporting cast. So, but I think over time, others have also come more strongly to the fore and developed their own ideas. And I think today, perhaps, there can be more even-handed discussion where it's not just a priori the French view that prevails on any number of issues. But nonetheless, that French reputation, rightly or wrongly, also hangs, of course, over the question of how Europe is looked at in the Sahel. Because oftentimes, rightly to some extent, citizens in the Sahel look at Europe or European Union as an extension of France or French interests, right? And that's also something that speaks to the question of trust and credibility. And I think to build trust and credibility, the first thing that France is now increasingly doing is also to keep a lower profile and not to always jump at the first occasion to say, here we are, and that's what we think, and that's what the others should think. And the other thing is that everybody in Europe should also have a long, hard look at their own engagement in the Sahel over the past decade, because, there were inconsistencies, mistakes were being made, and one should not gloss over all of this because there is a legitimate critique in the region also as to what Europeans did or did not. And that does not necessarily mean in the crisis management mode, but also vis-a-vis, for example, the questions of democratic government and so on and so forth. That's a deep-seated problem, and it's also very prominent in the perception of many forces, societal forces, civil society in the region. That's also partly explains why ECOWAS has such a difficult time to engage in the Sahel. And so I think these fundamental questions have also to be tackled. My last point would be simply, well, as you all have probably noticed, the Germans are now entering a bit of an election cycle. So, I do not have much hope that Sahel will now be front and center. The political class, the political parties, and so on, they will look at the elections. And also, of course, there are a lot of other competing issues on the international agenda, like Ukraine. And so, like the Trump administration, I think we also have to look at the big picture. But that should not be an excuse not to look at the Sahel. On the contrary, because, I would not be presuming that the US will be terribly helpful in the Sahel, but maybe I'm wrong. Hopefully, I'm wrong. But so just to say, don't have too many expectations on what the German perhaps input in that conversation should be or will be. There is I'm certainly normally a strong believer in the German-French motor in the European Union. But I think here, as Jonathan also said, others have also now really big stakes, like Italy, like Spain. We have now also a new European Union special envoy. So perhaps there are some conversations to be made. And I think all the points that Jonathan made are really valid. To anticipate the possible developments, how do we anticipate the security situation to evolve? What kind of scenarios are there in terms of new coups or other political disruptions? I mean, we really have very little clarity on that, including us as researchers and observers. So I think that's a very important point to make.
Thank you. Jonathan, do you have some?
Yeah, just quickly, I tend to agree on the interests. Everyone tends to think that France may have more interest or broader interest, or I don't know. But in the end, I think that Germany and France's interest in the area are the same, clearly. And both for security reason, both for political, like strategic reason, and both just for stabilization and in general developing partnerships locally. So I don't see really interest being divergent, and I think that the divergence we were mentioning is more a method or is the idea of build a common vision, because when you build this common vision you'll have strategic clarity. At least we will be talking about the same thing, and I think we are not there yet. To rebuild the trust and credibility, I think that part of the idea mentioned are the foundation of that. Of course, there is the talk about the colonial legacy. But when I was mentioning supporting democratic forces, it was the idea to give space, not to meddle, because if you give space to these forces, they are autonomous. And of course, they know about the needs of the countries. They know about the needs of the population, and they have their own political battle. And so it's a good way for them to express that to France and Germany, and put France and Germany in a position of listener and a humble position of just saying, okay, please, how do you understand the situation in your country? What can we do about it? Do you want help in any kind? And that would be a good way to maybe shift the approach to the area. And so for the foundation of a broader EU strategy, I think that, yeah, there is a thing is that France do have a lot of assets, especially political connection and political understanding and at the different level of the societies, not only at the political, like the presidential level. A lot of the time we say that France knows only about the political powers. It is not true. I think Germany do have an understanding from the ground also. They do have a lot of people on the ground knowing and connecting within the societies. So I think that if you join that to the budgetary approach, to the fact that both France, Germany, Spain, and Italy, for instance, want to invest and put money clearly on this topic, you could have a broader EU strategy, but you need to have a political mindset or a strategic mindset for EU, because one of the main issues is that EU pour a lot of money, especially on development, but not only the past years. And in the end, no one knows exactly what EU did. And no one knows, I mean, except for the researchers or except for the experts. But in the societies, no one knows. And it's for instance, the subject of development. Everyone tends to say that China or Russia is investing more and more in Africa and is the first partners. In terms of money, this is not true. The first partner is EU. But because there is no strategic substance to its approach, of course, it's only like just contracts and money. There is no political discourse over that. So in the end, this is Russia and China that have their influence on the rise.
Thank you very much. So we have 25 minutes left. So I would like to give the floor to the participants. There is Nana Umutoresi, who has been raising their hand for quite some time. So I will give you the floor, and then we will explore the questions. There are already a lot of very interesting questions in the chat. So yeah, I will. Let me just, here. You can speak, I think.
Hello, can you hear me?
Not very well.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much, everyone. I'm Nana Turesi. I'm currently the regional director for the International Union for Conservation of Nature for West and Central Africa. So you may think, what is the relationship of conservation of nature and the conflict in the Sahel? But I'm speaking in my previous capacity as regional director for UNDP for the Sahel region for the past 10 years, actually. I've been with IUCN only 18 months. So I've been working on those issues, and I'm very pleased to hear this conversation, and I hope I have other colleagues on board here. But it's interesting to hear the topic about the possible or potential Franco-German strategy in the region. This rings a bell to me because in 2017, we set up a donors alliance called the Sahel Alliance, where we thought that multilateral and even bilateral cooperation was failing in the Sahel. And we were not seeing any outcome of anything we're doing in the region. And I do appreciate, Jonathan, when you mentioned that there's so many strategies in the Sahel. At the time, we did a mapping of how many strategies there were in the Sahel. There were 21 strategies in the Sahel. Yet, the crisis was going on, and we couldn't see. And here we are today, where we are, basically. So coming back or trying to narrow it down to a bilateral Franco-German strategy, it questions me about whether we do really understand what is at stake today. And we are having an external reading again of the situation, because we should be aware, and I'm still sitting in the region here in my new capacity, but what we're reading from the region here is that there's already a failure of multilateralism, and the Sahelian countries are very much aware of that. And I do wonder, I didn't do any further study to find out whether there has been, today the strategy of the three Sahelian countries that withdraw from ECOWAS are built on this crisis of multilateralism, whether there's a real strategy. And I think we should question that, first of all, because they do have strategies. We should be conscious of that. Secondly, from that perspective, I don't believe that in the reading of the Sahelian countries, they can really see that French and Germany are not in the best relationship today to come up with a common strategy in the Sahel. So what is the strategy going to be built on? Of course, we cannot speak of security or military strategy. Now, of course, the window, and I still believe, and the Germans have remained in the region in terms of cooperation based on community-led aspects, based on development cooperation. Now, are we speaking of development cooperation? What are the common interests that France and Germany can have beyond that, the development in development cooperation, and what are the best mechanisms that we could use? Have we thought about the diaspora that are in both countries? What is the strategy going to be built on? Is it related also to migration? Because I believe that in as much as these countries want to withdraw from ECOWAS or want to claim their sovereignty, I think the bottom line is that they're not totally close to any form of cooperation. When you listen to them, it is their priorities that they want partners to focus on today. So French-German cooperation or strategy for the Sahel, all I'm hearing is, yeah, fine, but what do we know of the strategies of those countries? We do have access to these countries. They're not, I don't agree with the fact that we believe that they're not open to cooperation. And I don't think either that things as so ethnicized as we tend to believe. The government of Mali today has more than 50% of Fulanis or mixed Fulanis. So there is social inclusion, there is ethnic inclusion. And the mixity of the communities in Mali today, you will have people who have their mothers from Timbuktu or their fathers from the south in the Fulani region. So the communities are mixed. The impression that people have rather is that whether it is not in the interest of the West to create that synthetic or that impression that there is an ethnic. There can be some ethnic crisis, like in the center there has been between the Dogons and the Fulanis. It is specific. It is very specific. So let's not try to systematize, and let's try to focus on what the priorities are, but also taking stock of what has worked and what has not worked. And the countries are very much aware of things that have not been working. I've worked before with the African Development Bank for 15 years, and I feel bitter and sad to see the state of development in Africa today. Out of the 54 countries, I believe that taking at cross-border level or at country level, there are about over 50 open crises in Africa today. So development aid has failed, multilateral cooperation has failed, bilateral cooperation has failed, and today we're talking about reinventing the whole mechanism of multilateral cooperation. This is the debate today. So narrowing it down, I appreciate again the discussion and the topic. Are we trying to withdraw about, or are we conscious of the fact that because of that crisis, let's team up and bring something new and reinvent our cooperation in the Sahel, with the recognition that there's a failure of what has been done so far. And again, the countries are open. It depends on the respect of their sovereignty. They're very conscious of that and their priorities. That is important. When we speak with those countries, whether it is from the UN, whether it is from my current position, which is nature conservation, and which is, by the way, related to conflict and crisis, because it's about the management of or the governance of natural resources, or the conflict between agricultural farmers and the herders with the shared water sources, etc., or land resources. That is important to flag. So what are we going to do about that, rather? And I think somebody talked about prospective analysis or projections or perspectives that we can have. We need to have such analysis co-led by Sahelians to have their perspectives. The societal structure of those Sahelian countries have to be factored in any type of prospective analysis to go forward in building any strategy in those countries. So this is my little contribution that I wanted to make, and I would like to have a panelist take on that. And thank you for giving me the opportunity, Djenabou, Cisse, on this talk and triggering this conversation again. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks. Before letting the speakers answer, maybe we can take questions so that you can address them right away. Right after. So we have one question for Denis. How would you explain the cleavage in the assistance of Western countries to Ukraine compared to Sahel states? Second, do you think that European countries could back Sahel states to use hyper-automated tools to fight terrorism? We have another question for Jonathan. What is France's current approach regarding dialogue with Mali, Burkina, and Niger beyond the public stance? Another question would be, has Germany had an evaluation process of its engagement in the Sahel for the past decade on diplomatic, defense, and development levels? Failures, successes, and lessons learned. What do you think of French attempts to do so far? And what could be the strategic interest of a Franco-German role in the Sahel? Do they really have a justification, or should this be limited to a EU role? Do we need a renegotiated Treaty of Rome where colonies were considered a dowry, but by the European colonial powers for the benefit of Europe's common market? So we'll let you address the questions you want and maybe first react to the previous remark.
Okay, Jonathan, should I start? Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Touré. I think you are right on many points. And I think also that neither Jonathan nor I do think that the French-German tandem should solve the problem. It is, I think, a joint task for many, and I think the failure of multilateralism that you mentioned is exactly what has happened. I see that on many levels. I see that on the level of ECOWAS. I see it on the level of the African Union, which was after 2013, in my point of view, regrettably entirely absent, and not only in the Sahel, by the way. The UN, well, I mean, we can have a discussion about MINUSMA, but that would take it too far. I would rather highlight now the increasing polarization within the United Nations Security Council. There was a point where peacekeeping missions were always gaining the my English is losing me. The wholehearted support of the council for a mission, and then 2-3 years ago, I think, or 4 years ago, it was the first time that I think Russia and China were not voting in favor of MINUSMA. So all of that is to say that the question of the Sahel is big, and it needs, therefore, I think, a lot of big answers. That's for sure. And these answers can also partly found, I think, in past failures, as you also mentioned. Now, I do not agree with you that if I look at the priorities, or what I think, in all modesty, of the priorities of the governments in place in the Sahel is not necessarily the priorities of the populations. That's my point of view. I know a lot of people think otherwise, but if you are so systematically repressive, if you are going after if you go after civil society activists, journalists, and whatever, for the most innocent kind of critique, then I fail to see how they have the best interest of their population in mind, while still arguing about sovereignty, national dialogue, and all of that. I think, it depends on what kind of assessment you make about these juntas. My view is this one, and from there I cannot therefore not see really a lot of space for engaging them. But of course, a different reading can lead to different conclusions. But this one is the one that I have. On Ukraine, I know I have heard that a lot of times, that European support to the Sahel is not on par with that of Ukraine. I totally agree, and I also understand that this is pointed out as a sort of inconsistency. But the fact of the matter is that, looked at from Europe, the invasion of Ukraine is a fundamental security stake for Europe, for its territorial integrity, which is not exactly the case in the Sahel. Again, this is a reading one can have. I think most people would probably say that from a European perspective, the invasion of Ukraine is on a whole different level than what is at stake in the Sahel. But I would also say that people in the Sahel are right when they say, okay, you are here basically not really looking at our interests. You are not sufficiently taking into account what we live. For example, when I say that one of the big push factors for Germany to join the international community in the Sahel was solidarity with France, then it's also one hint that, it was not perhaps so much in the first place Malian concerns or Malian problems. That's also part of the story that is part of the story, but nonetheless, I think engagement has scaled up, although it has not been entirely effective. And that leads me to that question about evaluation. No, there has been no evaluation of that past decade. I have wrote a long report now exactly on this matter, and I hope to publish that in English in the next couple of weeks, where I try to assess to the best of my capacities what Germany has done in Mali and in the Sahel. And I look forward to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Denis. Now, Jonathan, just keep in mind we have 8 minutes left.
So that. No, so very quickly, on the first remark, I agree with a lot that has been said, especially on the bilateral and multilateral failure. Even though I think that you always have to work strategies, I mean, you always have to try to adapt and do new policies, even though you failed before. But I agree with that. But I think that there is a key point that has not been addressed enough. It's the political struggle. In the end, this whole crisis started with a struggle between northern groups, rebel groups, and Bamako. The only people that put credit to try to deal with that were the French and the Algerian, especially the Algerian diplomacy. But there were not much diplomacy, even the French one, but in general, there were not much diplomacy to try to deal with that issue. So I think that there is a huge space for Europeans, for African partners, to try to broker deals between Bamako and the CMA or CSP or the rebel group of the north, but also to support the efforts of dialogues that were blossoming with people in the jihadist group, even though these dialogues are slightly different and way harder to deal with. But President Bazoum in Niger started something. The former President Kabore started a thing also. So maybe not the best solution, but still it was very grassrooted solution supported by political local authorities. And I think that there is a space for that strategy to try to broker deals between actors of the conflict. This is the first thing. You mentioned migration as an issue for Europe, and maybe a subject to address this strategy. The thing is that there is almost no one in Europe coming from Mali, Burkina, or Niger. Niger is a corridor, but in the end, the people directly targeted by the crisis in Sahel are more disseminating around West Africa than in Europe. So it's not a good, even though it tends to securitize and it tends to give motivation to Europe to act, it's not the same issue. And I disagree on one thing, it's the ethnicizer issue. I totally agree with you that we tend to have a look through the communities and that we tend to forget that people are very mixed and communities are very mixed and on every level of society. That I agree with you. But the fact that the states develop local militias, community militias, they built a discourse around Fulanis. They now are repressing, the military are just killing civilians, especially for those Fulani tribes. When you talk with people, the fear between communities, the violence between them are on the rise, clearly. So maybe everything is not ethnicized, and hopefully, But still, this is a main issue, and there is a need to address it, because the only ones that are currently addressing it are the jihadists themselves, saying we are all Muslim, we don't care about the limitation of the communities, and okay, you are targeted by this or this guy because you are Tuareg, because you are Arab, because you are Hausa, you know. But we are like community blind, so please join us, and we'll do something together. And even though the jihadists are exploiting the tension between communities, so you can't say that there is no ethnicization, and especially, and I totally agree with Denis, especially when the current juntas and the current governments are pouring oil on the fire and not working to diminish the level of violence between communities, especially on the repression and especially on the discord. So this is for the first issue. But so to sum up, I think there is something that France, Germany, European or other partners can do on the political level. And on the development level, I think that you're right, everything almost failed. So maybe it's time to do only what I was mentioning before, agriculture, and just work on that field, probably helping the local needs and trying to see how we can help develop that. For the question on dialogue with Mali, Burkina, and Niger, actually, the main lesson, and it linked to the lesson learned question, the main lesson learned from the French government is what Denis was mentioning, the fact that now they are doing low profile diplomacy, and it's way better and way quieter and way easier than before. Even though I know that there are dialogues in Mali between authorities, French authorities, the embassies and the Malian authorities, but there are no dialogue in Burkina Faso and almost no dialogue in Niger. You have to remember that it has been now almost 2 years that the current government in Burkina is clearly targeting French officials, French people of the administration. They are pushing like disinformation on people, and now they are doing the same in Niger. So clearly in Niger and in Burkina Faso, they are on this path of targeting directly France for everything that's happening, even like building disinformation or fake news around for instance, the fact that France is like setting up a base for terrorism and are training terrorists. This kind of thing is on the rise. So no, there are no dialogue with Burkina and Niger, and they are dealing through partners, intermediary partners. Just a quick word on Ukraine, because I agree. I totally agree on the fact that politically speaking, Europe and the Western world went full on behind Ukraine, and that at the same time, France had a lot of difficulties to convince partners to come in Sahel, help the situation for the last decade. But at the same time, you cannot exactly do a comparison between fighting terrorism on one hand and fighting one of the biggest military army in the world, Russia. And also, it gives you a clue on something, is that both in Europe and especially also in West Africa, everyone tends to consider terrorism as a threat, but not a very hard threat. And everyone is like failing on that. Almost everyone underestimates the jihadists all the time. And now it has been 20 years and we continue to underestimate the jihadists. So this is also why you don't have the same level of money and the same level of support, because everyone tends to think that, okay, this is only like 500 people and it's easy to fight them. No, it's not. And clearly now I think we understand that the hard way. And finally, on the lesson learned, so the first one and the biggest is that one. The French authorities are clearly in a process of trying to understand what's happening. At first, they were clearly on the blame game on putting everything on Russia. Now they understand that a huge part is a Franco-African discussion that needs to happen on several topics. But for a discussion, you need to have partners that want to discuss with you. And in Sahel, it's not the case. It's the case in other countries, but it's not the case in Sahel first. And the second thing, and I wrote a paper on that if you're interested in this summer, called La France est au milieu du gué. I think that France understands its vulnerabilities, understand that it needs to address the military-based problem, the CFA money problem, the colonial legacy problem, and others. But at the same time, France did not set up its new goal. So they don't know really what to do and how to do it on the long run, I mean. So this is why I think that they partially learn, they partially understand the lessons, but at the same time, they don't have new ideas. It's very hard when you are, let's say, stuck in a crisis for 10 years to be innovative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you so much to all the participants. We sadly have to end the comment session here. It was a pleasure for us to organize this first session. A second session will happen on December 12th and will deal with strategic competition in the region. And we will have a final session on January 27th regarding EU policy in the region, and especially what future role for the organization in the region. Again, there will be the replay of this webinar. So let me know if you want it or cannot access it. And I look forward to future exchanges with some of you in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Good afternoon.